The thing about Quinn Harlow was that she never looked like what she was. She was 31 years old, 5'4" in her nursing clogs, with dark blonde hair that had been in the same messy bun since 5:45 that morning when she'd driven to work in the dark with a travel mug of coffee that had gone cold before she reached the hospital. She had ink stains on the chest pocket of her scrubs, teal, faded to the color of sea glass from 100 wash cycles, and there was a dried coffee ring on her left cuff from when she'd tried to eat lunch at the nurse's station and gotten pulled back to Trauma Bay 2 before the cup was even half empty. She had worked 12 hours in the emergency department of Creston Valley Medical Center. In those 12 hours, she had placed 4 IVs on patients whose veins had long since given up cooperating with needles. She had talked a 19-year-old through his first panic attack, sitting with him on the edge of a gurney and breathing deliberately slow so he could follow her breath without being told to. She had held the hand of a 74-year-old woman who had come in alone after a fall, who didn't have anyone listed under emergency contacts, who had asked Quinn twice if she was going to be okay. Quinn had told her yes both times. She had also arranged for a social worker consultation, updated the chart, flagged the case for a follow-up call, and done all of it while covering 2 other rooms because they were short-staffed on Tuesdays, and Tuesdays had a way of being the hardest kind of busy, not dramatic, just relentless. She had done it because that was the job, and Quinn Harlow had decided a long time ago that the job was worth doing right. By the time she walked into Patterson's market at 7:14 in the evening, she had not sat down in nearly 5 hours. She needed coffee, eggs, bread, and something for dinner that didn't require more than 20 minutes of effort, because 20 minutes was approximately what she had left in her. The store was running at that particular Tuesday evening frequency. Families circling the prepared food section, kids trailing behind carts, a man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead arguing quietly with the self-checkout machine. Ordinary. The kind of ordinary that feels almost unbearably good when you've spent 12 hours in a place where nothing is ordinary. Quinn moved slowly down the coffee aisle, squinting at labels with the concentration of a person whose brain was running on the last of its reserves. She had a voicemail from her brother. She'd listened to it 3 times in the parking lot. "Hey, flight landed early. I'm actually in town for a bit. You at home? Might swing by the store if you're heading that way. I've got Sabre with me. Don't panic." She'd smiled at that. Declan Harlow always ended his messages that way, "Don't panic," as if the sight of her brother walking through a door had ever done anything except make her feel better. She texted back, "Patterson's on Linden. Come find me." Then she dropped her phone into her scrub pocket and reached for the dark roast. She didn't hear Warren Callister coming. The cart hit hers before she saw him, a soft collision, the kind that happens a dozen times an hour in a crowded grocery store, the kind that most people absorb without ceremony and move past. Quinn pulled her cart to the side automatically, the reflex of someone who has spent years navigating tight spaces with equipment and urgency, and looked up with the word sorry already forming on her tongue. She didn't get a chance to say it. The man looking back at her was somewhere in his mid-50s, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of tan that accumulates on boats and golf courses rather than from any actual labor. He wore a polo shirt with a small embroidered logo on the chest, the kind of shirt that signals a particular income bracket without being flashy enough to look like it's trying. His cart had exactly 4 items: a bottle of wine, a box of water crackers, a wedge of aged cheese, and sparkling water. His expression suggested that he had not been anticipating any kind of interaction this evening and that he viewed the current one as an imposition. "Watch where you're going," he said. Quinn kept her voice even. 8 years of navigating patients and their families through some of the worst moments of their lives had given her an almost biological ability to regulate her tone. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't see you coming." He looked at her, not quickly, deliberately, the slow and assessing look of a person who wants you to know you're being evaluated. His eyes moved from her face down to the scrubs, to the ink-stained pocket, to the coffee stain on her cuff. He took his time. "Obviously," he said. She should have let it go there. She knew the calculus of these moments, had run it enough times to know the outcome. Engage and it gets worse. disengage, and it's over in 30 seconds, and you get your coffee and go home. She had absorbed worse than this in the hospital. She had stood in hallways while family members screamed things at her that were not, in any rational sense, her fault, and she had held the line because that was what her patients needed from her, and because holding the line was something she had gotten very good at. But she was tired. The fluorescent lights were bright in the particular way that bites behind the eyes when you've been awake since before dawn, and she had spent 12 hours being the person who absorbed things so that other people didn't have to. "Excuse me?" she said. Something lit up in his expression, not quite pleasure, but the recognition of an audience he hadn't been expecting. He had, Quinn realized, started speaking louder. "You people need to pay attention in public places." His voice carried now, deliberate, projecting down the aisle. The couple examining French presses at the far end had gone still. A woman with a toddler on her hip had stopped reaching for something on the opposite shelf. A teenage boy 2 feet to Quinn's left had looked up from his phone. Everyone was watching, nobody was moving. Quinn felt her face settle into the careful, controlled expression she had developed over years of crisis management. Calm exterior, machinery running hard underneath. "Don't escalate. I apologized," she said. "I don't think I deserve to be spoken to like that." He made a sound, a short exhale of contemptuous amusement, and it was the particular frequency of that sound. The sound of someone who has found something small and unworthy of serious engagement that landed differently than the words had. "You apologized." He repeated it like she'd said something naive. "You people wander around these places not paying attention, bumping into things, and then sorry and everything's supposed to be fine. Some of us have places to be. You people." The phrase sat in the coffee aisle with a weight that was difficult to identify precisely but impossible to miss. "I'm not sure what you mean by people like me," Quinn said. She said it quietly. It cost something to keep the quiet in it. He gestured at her scrubs, a lazy, encompassing sweep of his hand, people who drag themselves through stores in their work clothes, looking like they just lost a battle with a 12-hour shift, or whatever it is. He adjusted his grip on his cart handle. "This isn't a break room, sweetheart. This is a public place. Some of us are trying to get our shopping done." The woman with the toddler looked at the floor. The couple at the end of the aisle found something extremely interesting about the display they were standing next to. The teenage boy had his phone out, but the screen was facing down against his palm. Nobody said anything. Quinn's jaw was tight. She could feel her pulse in her temples. She knew this sensation, had felt it in 100 different rooms. Every time a hospital administrator told her that staffing was being looked into, every time a patient's family directed their fear and helplessness at whoever was closest, and she happened to be closest, she had learned to breathe through it. She had learned to be professional, because professional was what the moment required. She was not at work. "I am a registered nurse," she said. Her voice was steady. She had worked hard to make it steady. "I just finished a 12-hour shift in an emergency room. I'm buying coffee. I apologized for the carts. I'd like you to speak to me like a human being." He blinked. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face, the flicker of a man who has pushed on something and found an unexpected edge. And then it was gone, closed over, replaced with the flat incuriosity of someone who has decided the information doesn't change anything. A nurse. He said it with the affect of a man acknowledging a fact that doesn't require comment. "Good for you." He straightened the items in his cart with the deliberate slowness of a man making a point about his time. "I suggest you pay better attention going forward. Some of us have places to be." He started to push his cart away. Quinn stood very still. Her hands were around the handle of her cart, and she was doing the math. The same math she'd been doing her whole adult life, the calculation about whether speaking up was worth the cost, whether the thing you would feel in your chest for the next 3 days from saying nothing was preferable to the thing you would feel in your chest for the next 3 days from saying something. She had run this equation in break rooms and parking garages and hospital hallways, and she had never found a version of it that felt clean. She was still deciding when she heard it. Not a dramatic sound, not the kind of entrance that announces itself, just the precise, purposeful click of nails on linoleum, moving at a steady pace from somewhere around the corner of the aisle. Declan Harlow was 6'2", 215 pounds, and he had a quality that Quinn had never found the right word for, even after 31 years. It wasn't the size. Plenty of large men radiated nothing but noise. It wasn't even the bearing, though the years had made that part of him unmistakable. The way he moved through space with an economy that communicated something without making any effort to. It was something in the stillness of him. A specific, cultivated stillness, the kind that only exists in people who have been in enough genuinely dangerous situations to understand that calm is not the absence of action. It is a form of it. He was in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray thermal with the sleeves pushed up, boots that had seen actual use. A duffel strap crossed his chest. His hair was shorter than the last time she'd seen him in person, which had been 14 months ago at a going-away dinner at their mother's house in Flagstaff that had felt carefully cheerful in a way that everyone had agreed not to address. Sabre walked beside him on a short leather lead. The Belgian Malinois was lean, the way working animals are lean, not thin, but efficient, every ounce of him organized toward function. Dark wheat coat with black saddle markings, ears forward, amber eyes moving across the space ahead with a measured attention that was categorically different from the way a dog looks at a grocery store. He wore a tactical harness and he moved with a precision that matched his handlers exactly, stride calibrated to stride, gaze tracking ahead and then quartering, and then ahead again, continuous and unhurried. Declan found Quinn's face in about 2 seconds. He read the situation in the way that she'd watched him read situations his whole life, quickly, completely, without making it visible that he was doing so. He took in her expression. He took in the man whose cart was moving away at the leisurely pace of someone who believes he's gotten the last word. He took in the stillness of the other people in the aisle, their particular quality of held breath, the teenager with the phone, and the couple and the woman with the toddler, all of them waiting to see if it was over. He walked to Quinn's side without hurrying. His hand dropped to her shoulder for a moment, brief, warm, the pressure of something that doesn't need to be said out loud. Callister had stopped. He was looking at Declan with the expression of a man recalibrating, not yet sure what he's recalibrating for. His eyes moved from Declan to Sabre and back again. "Something I can help you with." His voice still had the elevated register of a man who has been performing confidence at a public volume and hasn't gotten the signal to stop yet. Declan didn't answer immediately. He reached down and adjusted the lead in his hand, a small, unhurried adjustment, not a command, and Sabre's gaze shifted to Callister with a smoothness that was somehow more unsettling than any sudden movement could have been. The Malinois looked at the man the way a good security camera covers a room, still, total, without malice, without mercy. "That her brother?" Callister asked, directing the question at Quinn without looking at her. "Yes," Declan said. He said it calmly and without particular emphasis, the way you state something that has already been established. Callister's chin lifted slightly. "She tell you what happened?" "I heard the last part of your conversation." "Then you heard her bump my cart, and I heard you say people like her." Declan's voice was level. It was conversational. It had a quality that Quinn recognized from years of watching her brother navigate difficult things. Not aggression, not threat, just a man who has made a decision about how this conversation is going to go and is now waiting for the other party to come to the same understanding. "I'd like to understand what you meant by that." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. Callister drew himself up, involuntary, the posture of a man who has spent decades in rooms where his height and his confidence and his polo shirts have functioned as adequate armor. "I don't owe you an explanation." "No," Declan said easily, "you don't." He shifted his weight slightly, and Sabre mirrored him without being asked, a small pivot, barely visible, just enough to realign the geometry of the aisle in a way that was difficult to articulate but impossible to miss. "You were speaking to a woman who spent 12 hours keeping people alive in an emergency room, and you spoke to her the way you'd speak to someone who inconvenienced you. And I'm standing here now, so I'm asking." The aisle was very quiet. Callister's eyes moved to Sabre again. The dog had still not moved beyond that single small shift, had not growled, had not displayed anything that could be characterized as aggression. He was simply present, his amber eyes on Warren Callister, with the complete and undivided attention of an animal trained to understand exactly what his presence means and exactly what it costs him nothing to communicate. "Your dog have a problem with me?" Callister asked. His voice had slipped a register without him seeming to notice. "Saber's fine," Declan said. "He's attentive. That's what he does." Something moved through Callister's posture, a subtle alteration, the way tide works on something solid, slow, and then all at once. His eyes moved to the couple at the end of the aisle, to the woman with the toddler. He registered, perhaps for the first time, how many phones were at angles that were not quite casual. "I don't know who you think you are," he started, his voice falling further, "but I'm not going to stand here and be—" "Sir." The word came from behind Quinn's left shoulder. The Patterson's market manager was a compact man in his 40s with a store polo and the expression of someone who had been watching a security monitor for several minutes and had decided it was no longer appropriate to continue just watching. Behind him, 2 other employees had stopped at the end of the aisle. The woman with the toddler had stepped back but kept her phone level. The teenage boy had his phone up openly now, not hiding it. The couple at the far end were no longer pretending to look at anything else. Quinn had spent enough time in emergency medicine to know what a room looks like when it turns. She had seen it happen in waiting areas when a family that had been separately grieving suddenly unified. There was a moment, not always loud, not always obvious, when the social weight of a situation shifted, when the person who had been moving with all the momentum suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of it. It happened fast. It usually happened all at once. It was happening now. The manager looked at Callister with the calm and precise expression of a man who has already reviewed the footage and knows what it shows. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to take your items and proceed to checkout. We've had concerns raised by several customers." Callister looked around him, really looked for the first time, taking in the phones and the employees and the stillness of the other shoppers, all of them watching, none of them looking away anymore. His face moved through a series of adjustments, each one arriving a little late. "This is completely," he started. "Sir," the manager said again quietly, "just that." Callister left. He did not say anything further. He put his wine and his crackers and his cheese and his sparkling water on a register at the front and paid with the focused efficiency of a man who has decided that leaving without looking back is the best available version of dignity. The automatic doors slid open and then closed behind him. The aisle released a breath. The manager came to Quinn and apologized twice, sincerely both times, and told her that the security footage from the aisle was clear and that the store would be following up through the appropriate channels. He said it with the manner of a person who means what they're saying, and Quinn thanked him and meant that too. Saber had sat down beside Declan in the coffee aisle. Declan was crouched next to him, his hand flat on the dog's back, saying something low and private. Saber turned his head and pressed it briefly and deliberately against Declan's shoulder. "He did well," Quinn said. Declan stood. He always does. He looked at her in the direct and uncomplicated way of someone who has known you for every single year of your life. "You okay?" Quinn considered the question honestly. She was aware of her own pulse, steadier now. The dull weight of the shift still sitting in her lower back. The particular exhaustion that comes not just from physical labor, but from the sustained, effortful management of your own responses to things that do not deserve the management they require. She thought about what it had felt like to stand in this aisle and watch people study their phones and their shelves and their feet, the collective calculation that said, "This isn't mine to get into." She had done the same thing herself other times, in other places. She understood how that math worked. She didn't blame them. She was still tired, though. "Yeah," she said, "I'm okay." Declan reached past her to the shelf, picked up the dark roast she'd been examining when everything started, and placed it in her cart. "Come on," he said, "let's get you home." They moved toward the front of the store, Saber between them with his leash slack, his ears forward, his stride quiet. Near the registers, a woman caught Quinn's eye, 50s, shopping alone, a cart full of ordinary Tuesday items of a small nod. Not dramatic, not performed. Just a human acknowledgement from one person to another. Quinn nodded back. Outside, the April evening had gone cool, and the parking lot was quiet and still. The sky was the particular color of an hour that has almost resolved into night, but isn't quite there yet. Quinn loaded her bags into the back of her car and stood with her hands on the hatch, not quite ready to close it. She thought about the way Callister had looked at her, that swift and confident assessment that took in everything visible and arrived at its conclusions before she had said a single word. The scrubs and the bun and the coffee stain and the tired eyes, cataloged and categorized and filed away under a heading that had nothing to do with who she was. People like her. She had spent 8 years getting quietly extraordinary at something that happened in rooms most people never saw, and she had done it without fanfare, without any particular expectation of recognition, because that was the job, and the job was its own reason. But it was something else to stand in a fluorescent-lit aisle and feel how invisible that made you to a certain kind of person. Not cruel, necessarily. Just certain. Certain that the shape of you, the clothes of you, the surface information of you, was the totality of you. She had never found a way to stop minding that. She had just found ways to put it down faster. Declan came around the side of her car and leaned his forearms on the roof, looking at her across the top. "You've been doing this too long on your own," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the observation of someone who has been watching from a distance and is now close enough to say out loud what he has been thinking for a while. Quinn looked at him. Her brother, who had spent months in places he still wasn't fully able to talk about, doing things that required a particular and specific kind of courage that she thought about sometimes in the quiet hours of a night shift when the department had gone briefly still. Who had come home with Sabre and 8 months of weight he was still figuring out how to carry. Who had gotten her text that evening and driven to a grocery store on Linden Street because she'd needed coffee and he'd wanted to see her, and it turned out both of those things were true at the same time. "I know," she said. And then, because it was Declan and it was a Tuesday and she was very tired and the evening had been what it had been, "I'll be better now." He looked at her for a moment longer and then nodded, that small particular tilt of his head that meant "I hear you, I believe you, and I'm also not going anywhere." Sabre sat between them in the parking lot, patient and still, his ears forward, his amber eyes moving slowly across the lot the way they always moved, covering the space, keeping track, doing what he had been built and trained and trusted to do. Quinn reached down and put her hand on the dog's head. Sabre leaned into it, brief and certain. There is a kind of person who moves through the world believing that the clothes someone wears, the condition of their hair, the exhaustion visible in their face at the end of a long day, constitutes a reliable account of who that person is. They make their assessments in seconds, in grocery store aisles and waiting rooms and parking lots, with a confidence born from never having been meaningfully wrong about it. They speak accordingly. Quinn Harlow had spent years being legible to those people in exactly the way they decided. She had never found the right words to explain what they were missing. She didn't need the words now. She got into her car. Declan followed in his truck. Sabre rode in the back with his nose to the cracked window, reading the night air as they moved through it. She got home, made the coffee, sat at her own kitchen table for the first time all day. She thought about the 19-year-old breathing through his panic attack, the woman with no emergency contacts, the IV that finally cooperated on the 4th try. She thought about her brother arriving around a corner in a grocery store because she had texted him and he had come. Outside, the evening had finished resolving. Stars over Creston Valley, faint through the kitchen window, another shift tomorrow at 6. She drank her coffee and let herself rest.